So I am just honored and thrilled that Brian Sikes, the CEO of Cargill, which is the largest privately held company in the world, has so graciously accepted the invitation to join us today. Uh, Brian has had an illustrious 30 plus year career starting in operations, working up into the current role that he's in today. I've worked with Brian personally, and so thank you so much to be here, not only in support of women in manufacturing. Cargill is a corporate sponsor, but for you, Brian, just in support of people in operations. I know it's a place really close to your heart, and especially women in operations, a group that's growing in numbers, and yet we have some ways to go. So with that, today's session is on building your reputation at work. And so most of the people on this call are within that 0 to 10-year range of employment, many on their first roles with their companies. Could you take us back to your early days, Brian, and help us learn about you? Describe your early start in Cargill and where and how your reputation started to take shape.
Well, thank you, Kay. Hi, everybody. Good to be with you. It's great to be with this group. So, yeah, I'll take you back. So I probably have certainly for the job I have now, maybe a non-traditional past. So I grew up in the deep South in a kind of a blue collar family that dairied. That I say we weren't very good dairy people because we went out of business when I was a kid. And so there was kind of no work to be had. There was north of Jacksonville, just south of the Georgia border. So my dad somehow, I should get this story exactly straight because my dad's still around, but he met somebody that owned a trucking company in Texas. We literally picked up a U-Haul and moved to Texas. He was going to drive a truck. That got me to Texas. Through that, met a really good friend that kind of pulled me into going to university. Nobody in my family had done that. So I didn't have that as a role model. I didn't have even aunts, uncles, cousins that I'm aware of that had gone to university, much less parents. So I was the middle of three boys. My older brother went in the military, and my younger brother went to work in manufacturing. And that's really what our family had done and what I'd seen. So I went, worked my way through school, got engaged to be married 2 days after I was going to graduate from Texas Tech University. I was graduating on a Saturday night in Lubbock, Texas, getting married on a Monday night in Austin. For those of you that know a little Texas geography, you realize how silly that is. But my parents, in order to come from Florida, they were back in Florida at this point. They could only come once. And so we had to marry those two things up. So I needed a job. My dad was clear when I called to say, I'm getting engaged. How are you going to provide for this lady that you've met? Which is what you did back then. At least that was the conversations in the South that my dad would have with us. And so I thought, we'll figure it out. We're in love. So I had 3 interviews, Home Depot, Cargill, and Frito-Lay, and ended up taking the Cargill job. Started in Plainview, Texas, in a beef plant. And that's where I spent my first 2 years. And I honestly believed I would never leave Plainview. Like, we had a path. It was a town of 20,000 people. It was not far from Lubbock, so it was kind of comfortable. It was a sleepy town for sure, but it was comfortable. And didn't think I'd leave, but I had a mentor that's a really good friend still today that was a general manager. And I say this honestly, and it'll be a theme probably about, mentors and sponsors and champions, but he was all of those for me, and invested in me in ways honestly no one had done really before, and kept encouraging me to kind of think about not leaving Cargill, but just going and having some other experiences, which I resisted for a while. But I did all the jobs in the plant. The way Cargill worked as a year, Kay, you might remember this, but you spent the first, at least in our program, spend a year, you had to do every job in the plant. You had to sign off, your supervisor had to sign off that you did your job. And then the next year, you basically were a fill-in supervisor for vacations. And so that's what I did before Kerry Humphreys, who, Kay, you may know that name. But anyway, he worked a system to get somebody to come offer me a job kind of outside of me knowing it. And we ended up moving to Chicago. And that kind of started a path for me that, ultimately led here, which was a total of kind of 14 moves from the first and a bunch of different jobs. And so, in some ways I'd say non-traditional because I really didn't have a vision. I didn't start thinking, I mean, yeah, like I said, my view was I wouldn't leave Plainview, Texas. So.
Yeah. Well, and so like you, I think about those early days and you got a job in hand and you just start working, right?
Yeah.
And so often we just dive into the work and the tasks at hand and not realizing that every day we show up, our reputation is being established, either wanted or unwanted. Can you think about like what would one or two attributes your colleagues would have listed about you in the early days that were your reputation?
Yeah, I think I grew up working at a really young age, like illegally working, like in a hog farm at like 7, 8 years old, like washing crates, almost for no money. But so I grew up working hard in a kind of those kind of environments. So for me, work was actually comforting. The plant setting was a little bit intimidating at first, but I think people would have said super hardworking and will do kind of whatever needs to be done. And it's a lot of advice I give young people now, even professionals, even our, MBA strategy people come in like, what do I need to do? Like, do whatever needs to be done that other people don't do. And that can be, I always use coffee as the example. Make the coffee. It's not your job, but people like people that do what needs to be done. And then you find yourself typically attached to some people that, see that and want you to be around them. And I think for my career, unknowingly at the time, it was just this willingness to just kind of do whatever. I didn't really care if it needed to be done, I was okay doing it. I think that was it was not intentional, wasn't even knowingly, just probably a little bit of how I was raised. So I was fortunate that got me a long ways down the road, just working hard, doing what needed to be done.
So it sounds like you weren't purposeful, just like I was. Just get in and you work. Just do the jobs that need to be done. Was there a point in your career, a light bulb moment, if you will, where you recognized that reputation is something that you wanted or needed to own differently?
Yeah, I think what happened was about the third move. I was moving every 2 years, is what was happening. And at the time, still pretty naive, like, okay, they just want me to go learn this distribution part of the business. They want me to go learn, and so I was moving and I'd moved and I'd actually was happy. And it was pretty disruptive because we had 4 kids, we had two kids every year, or I had a kid every 2 years. So we were getting a bigger family and it was getting super disruptive for the family. And they asked me to move to this particular place that I didn't know it, but was struggling. And they said, you have a reputation where you fix things. And so early on, maybe probably 7, 8 years into my career, I was known as a fixer. So if we had problems, they would send me to those, which I didn't mind because I like change and I like learning new things. And so, but I think at that point I realized, hey, I'm good at something. Yeah, I think it was the first time, honestly. And the women on this call have different challenges than I have, but I did have mine. I grew up in a divorced family. I grew up in a very poor family. I grew up moving all the time as a kid myself. I grew up with red hair. I tell everybody all the time, there's only 3% of the world that has red hair, and we're dying off. So I'm begging my kids to have a redheaded child, and we're 0 for 5. But so I had my own little challenges of like not feeling competent, not feeling smart enough, some of those kind of things. And it was this first time, like, hey, they think I'm pretty good. And I think at that point, I'm like, man, maybe I can do more, and I think somewhere a light bulb went off on this idea that I was good at fixing things was probably when confidence started to come in that I could build on that.
So known as the turnaround, or I can solve problems. I can I can put out the dumpster fire.
Yes, which is not all good sometimes, but yes, that was probably my reputation.
Well, actually, this was an aha moment for me because I think of when I first became aware of Brian Sikes. I think that your reputation was also now, it was at the hallmarks of what they are now, which is people first, customer first mindset. And so that's different than the fixer upper turnaround.
Yeah.
So was that purposeful work to shape? And I asked that because several sessions ago, our topic was on finding your North Star and really understanding your strengths, understanding your passion plays. And when you're in those spaces, you'll be at your best. And so like how did customer first and people first, did you fall into those types of jobs and realize that was your reputation, or were you purposeful about evolving there?
Yeah, I think there's two answers to that. The people first, as I was progressing and getting more responsibility, first off, they kept putting me in new jobs where I wasn't a domain expert. I rarely did the same thing. And so I was naturally humbled. I couldn't not be humbled because I really didn't know that much. And I did quickly kind of selfish. Yeah, it was selfish in a lot of ways. Learned that if I'm going to do this, I got to get these people that are on my team to be motivated and do a good job. I mean, it's literally no more strategic than that. Like, I don't know the answers. I know we've got some problems here. And so team became kind of everything for me, like building cohesive teams. And I, quite honestly, my strength finders, if you guys are big strength finders fans or not, I come from a high harmony, which people don't believe about me. They think I'm such a change agent that they can't believe I'm high harmony, but I'm high harmony because I believe in teams. And I think that comes from being a divorced kid, honestly, which I unpacked at a Cargill leadership deal. And I'm like 40. I'm like, where did this come from? Like, now I know. Can't believe I'm in harmony. And now I know why. It goes back to a 5-year-old kid that felt, some pain. Mm-hmm. So probably more information than you wanted, but I think I began to have this theory, like I'm successful only because Greg Page, this is this iconic CEO we used to have at Cargill that literally could probably do everybody's job better than them. And we all knew that. And that's just not me. Mine is just getting really smart people, trying to serve them, which is my mantra now, so they can do their jobs better and that they enjoy working here and they're motivated to work here. So that kind of got the momentum, was like, this works. Like, get good people, treat them really, really well, give them good feedback. It doesn't mean you're always nice. I mean, it's not all positive, but anyway, so that was that. The customer deal was back to solve the problems at hand. We were so bad, Kay, in our business at customer, like we were very transactional. And I'm like, I went and talked to customers like, here, you guys are transactional. And I'm like, we can fix that. So I just kind of by nature insisted we become more customer centric. So I had to be. And then all of a sudden Cargill, because we weren't great with customers, looked around and said, Sikes is good at it, which it's not who I am or necessarily my passion either, but it was something that needed to be done. And somehow my face, as you probably saw for a while, I've grown into it maybe, but it needed to be done. And I didn't see anybody else kind of being the voice of the customer.
That's a really interesting, because those were two different paths, right? The people first was more about, I need to become a servant leader mm-hmm. to effectively lead and move the organization that I'm leading. And second of all, it was more Cargill, my company needs this. We need, whether it be customer focused or an innovation focus, and I can be that, and I can lean in and showcase that. So that's really good information. And I firmly believe that a reputation is the greatest asset that we have long-term. And I think it's even more important than a strong resume. Can you share a time when your reputation either opened a door for you or maybe failed to open it for you, and the lessons learned around that?
Yeah, I'll try to do this briefly. I have a couple examples that I share. One was super impactful for me. I always treated my teams really well, but as I was having some success, it didn't always translate to my peers. And so I remember sitting in a meeting once, and I'd been at a plant. We'd had a security kind of breach while I was there, and I had not posted anybody, and we're having a team meeting with our boss. So my peers were the boss, and I just mentioned it. Well, I didn't mention it to the head of ops, who caught me afterwards and who was a friend of mine. I wasn't trying to embarrass him. It was oversight, but it was a huge miss, and it embarrassed them, and they let me know it. And it really hurt me because I didn't really, it kind of fundamentally, like I got to be careful with peers. So that was one, was just be really careful. And I think most people fail with their peers. Most people don't fail with their teams. When you get high, up in an organization, I think you start, the people that can get along with peers, and when peers begin to, if you will, nominate that person, like naturally be the next leader, I mean, that's when things tend to happen. So that'd be one. The second was a little bit like the story I told about this idea of learning about myself and why harmony is actually important to me. I was doing three, all the leadership programs we have, and we're going through them, and it's a cohort for a year, and it's a very diverse global team, and it's just amazing. And I'm doing super good in my career, and I think my team loves me, and I have all this 360 feedback, and you get this envelope in your front, and you open it up and you start reading it, and first it's all the positives, you're like, oh, they love me. And then consistently I got this feedback that I don't, it wasn't necessarily that I was a bad listener, but it was for sure that I don't listen long enough. I try to solve people's problems, and it crushed me because I love my teams. I legit love my teams, and I want to, treat them well. And it was a massive like epiphany to me. Like I'm trying to, they come in and say, hey, Brian, such and such. And I'm like, let's do this, this, and this. And they're like, actually, I don't want you to solve that problem. I just need you to hear me that it's a problem. And so that was the feedback I got. I went home, flew home, my wife, Dana, 33 years. And I said, she says, how was your week? And I said, it was great. Blah, blah, blah. We did all this. We did feedback. How was feedback? It was good, except I can't believe like they told me I don't really listen that well. Like I don't listen long enough. And I promise, as sure as I'm sitting here, she said, I've been trying to say that to you for years, and it was like, it was not only a change at work, it was a change at home. And it wasn't that I mastered it that moment. I got a coach, I had a whiteboard on my background, and my coach said, you need to do something to even flag your mirror. So I literally put 3 question marks in the top upper right corner of my white bulletin board. I don't do that anymore. That was 15 years ago. Hopefully I've learned some of that. And it was just to remind myself to ask 3 questions before I try to problem solve, because it's in my DNA to problem solve. It's what got me here was solving problems. And that was probably the single biggest, because it hurt me so bad, personally at home and at work. And again, I don't suggest I have it perfect, but my feedback is much, much better than it was prior to those moments.
Yeah.
So,
well, I appreciate what you learned and how you move forward. So literally you had a visual cue in your environment to remind yourself to listen first, tell me more, if you will. And it's interesting, the strength in your early years, solving problems, fixing things quickly,
yes,
became a feedback that hurt, that crushed you. The very thing that you were rewarded for in the first 10 became something that you need to curb, if you will, where you are now.
it's exactly right. And making sure I tell people too, like, hey, I'm bad at this. Like, I'm not good. So when you see me do this, just call me out.
Yeah.
My team, and give them permission to say, hey, you're doing it again. And not everybody will do that, but some would.
Brian, you mentioned something in that last answer that I think I know I've struggled with, and young people at work, they think about, okay, my reputation at work is this, and I want it to be this. And then, now I can take off my work hat and this is who I am at home. Have you ever struggled with that dual persona, or had to make a change, or like, this is too much work to be one person at work at home? Or have you always been as authentic as the day is long, like we're experiencing now?
Yeah, this is hopefully taken the right way. I decided really early on, I won't name the boss, but I had a boss who was in Nebraska City, Nebraska, at the Apple Inn, at a restaurant we'd have. And he would go there those evenings after we'd been at work all day, and he'd drink beer and he would smoke cigarettes. And then we'd have the Christmas party at the end of the year, and his wife didn't know that he drank. So we lived in Wichita. We'd come up to this plant, go back and forth. We traveled together. And his wife didn't know that he drank or smoked. So he would tell us all, we couldn't say anything. And I remember, like, this is my second year in the company or something. And I'm like, I'm never going to do that. Like, I'm not smart enough to keep up with it. And it's a little bit of an integrity issue for me, that I say I'm not going to tell jokes that I don't say at home. I'm not going to treat people differently. And some of my accountability is, my wife has always been, have her at every event I can. Now I even travel, whether I want her to know and understand Cargill. It's a bit of accountability for me. So we have our teams over at our home, and those kind of things. So I don't say that to brag. It was just a fundamental principle for me very early on, that I'm going to be exactly the same person. I'm not going to take the risk. And again, maybe you guys don't need the psychotherapy version of me, but I think maybe coming from a divorced family, my family was so important to me that I refused to let anything put that at risk. And so that was one of my ways of expressing that, is if I'm a jerk here, just like at home, I wasn't listening, and I wasn't listening at work. That would be an all true of whatever complaints people had of me, my wife would have had those same complaints. And maybe
Well,
whatever strengths I think they'd have seen, hopefully.
yeah, I love how you've embraced your family to both help and understand you at work and what you're facing, as well as, you know, just understanding then when you transition back home. As you know, I married a gentleman who happened to be a leadership coach. So I'm thankful I had 24/7 coaching on and off the job. All right. So Brian, we are winding down on our time today. But we have some really, really talented women on this call. And you've given us some great advice about building your reputation. What additional advice would you have to give? Maybe I didn't ask, but you've thought about something you wanted to share with the women on this call about building reputation at work in manufacturing.
You know, I'm hesitant to try to give this group advice. What else? I am passionate. I don't think we talked about it. I mean, I have 3 daughters. So my passion for doing things equitable comes from that, from watching them not always be treated the way I thought they should be, whatever that setting might be. And Kay might have been in a meeting where I found out that we didn't have uniforms for women. We didn't have sanitary, you know, products and I didn't know it. I mean, the business is so damn big. Sometimes it was ignorance. It was unacceptable ignorance, but it wasn't knowingly. And I remember sitting with a group of women here, not far from where I'm standing now, and finding that out and being literally crushed. And some of these people might have been in that room when I found that out. So I say that say I do care deeply that everybody gets treated right. I mean, it's just a fundamental belief. So I think, again, I don't know if I'd call it advice. One thing I'd say is do dream big. Like and I know I'm not a female, but there are some similarities in paths that I took, and maybe many of you are on, which is, I mean, I had no idea, what was possible. And I was not very strategic. I'm not telling you not to be strategic. You're smarter and more strategic than I am, probably, likely, most, if not all of you. But you can probably do more than you think, would be one that I'm comfortable saying, for sure. And then I would say speak up. If your employer, and there's plenty of Cargill people on here, if we're not providing you what you need for you to feel safe, for you to feel valued, for you to do your job the very best of your capability, then you need to speak up. And obviously you need to do it in a way that's effective, right? It's not it's not necessarily blowing things up. There might be a time for that, but hopefully not. But I think how you do it matters. But you need to do it. You need to raise your hand, and again, don't be afraid to be a leader. It's something I think most employers, are getting on board with and wanting to do better. And again, sometimes it's ignorant. Sometimes we don't know what's going on, even though we should. So I would say be bold and be courageous in that. And then the other thing I kind of said earlier is, work with your peers. I mean that. I think people misunderstand. I don't know how I got my job. I don't know who the board ultimately decided that I got this job. I have heard from some people say that it was because of others in the organization that thought that I would be the right person. And I said, wasn't necessarily that the board looked down and said, who's the most talented, strategic person in the company? It's like, who has followership? Who do people trust and work for? And I think I have some great peers. I want to be really careful on here, but I think some of that came from peers saying, hey, we trust that fella, and we think he'd be, do his best to keep the company headed in the right direction. So I think that's true for you all. When I hear that, when I'm looking for, people to promote, there's a capability set, which is critical. It's a given, but it's like, how do they, and it's not about being nice. I was a change agent. Cargill didn't bring me in here, and even in this role to be status quo. We're going to do, significant things over the next few years to continue to transform the company. So it's not about being nice. It's about treating people well. So, but think about your peers when you do that, because I think people fall down. They don't even know it, because they get people talk about them behind them, and all of a sudden a brand's established that may not be true. So anyway, maybe that's what I'd leave you with, Kay, or
That's fantastic. Sage advice. I heard In particular, I heard dream big and
Yep.
leave room for expansion.
That's right.
Well, we have, maybe in the interest of maximizing time, we literally have 2 minutes. I'd love for someone on this call, one question. We've been talking about the courage to share your voice and have the confidence to ask a question. Does anybody have one? I would take the first one, written one in the chat, or a verbal question. I know it's hard. All right.
I have a question.
Great. Thank you for the courage to go first, Lynn.
Oh, you're welcome. I guess I'll get on camera. Pardon my appearance, right?
No
So
apologies. Thank you for the courage to go first. One question.
Yeah. Okay, I'll be quick. Thank you so much for your time. It's definitely been an honor. So my question is, if one finds themselves having a reputation issue, what would be your advice for restoring a reputation that maybe's gotten damaged due to some perception issues?
Yeah, it's a really hard, I think it's a hard thing, reputation is, I was told by a boss, trust takes 10 years to develop and 10 seconds to, and he used the F word, up. That was the old days. And I think reputations you have to be a little careful with too, but I think the way you do it, and I've had to do this myself, is actually just sit down. And it can be with a person, or if it's a group, if it's peers, on a leadership team, maybe you call them aside. If it's an individual, and go, hey, I mean, it sounds like this is how you think of me or others think of me, and it's not who I want to be. It's not who I think. Maybe it's, if you're totally, you have to think about all the dynamics, but I think that's it. It's direct, and it's not who I want to be, and it's not who I want to be perceived as. And so, I want to work on that. And I think when people get confronted, and social media and others make it really easy to kind of bully people and put them in a corner and, paint untrue things about them. But I think face to face, when you say that's not actually who I am, and again, maybe you did something. Many times I had actually done something, like I'd embarrassed my ops leader unknowingly, but I hadn't. So I had to apologize and say, that'll never happen again, and then I had to make sure and he was still mad at me. It took a while, but eventually we made up, and it took me a while. I had to demonstrate that change in behavior and look for opportunities. So I would just say address it head on, and say, that's, again, if it's true, then you got to say that I made a mistake, and I'm not going to do that again. That's not who I want to be. If it's a misperception, then you handle it a little bit differently, but the same in person. And if it's a group that you need to do it with, a team, your team, sometimes with your own team, you got to sit down and go, I've had a bad series of meetings or whatever, and I'm going to fix that. And so help me fix that.
Thank you. Right. So one mirror is just kind of being vulnerable, and I guess asking, for acknowledging kind of what others are perceiving. Because I think with a cross-generational workforce, what might have been an acceptable way of communicating maybe 10, 20 years ago is no longer. So you have to kind of adapt your communication style. So that's something found. Thank you so much for your.
I think that's well said, Lynn. And I think you said the word, actually, I didn't even use it, but I think it's right. I think vulnerability is key. And I think it's okay to be vulnerable. I think it wasn't before. I think we've actually become, it's actually more acceptable today than it was 10 years ago to be vulnerable. And again, it can't be false vulnerability, but authentic vulnerability. I think people connect to, and I hear that quite often, and it just makes you more approachable. I tell people all the time, let's give each other some grace, and grace is not a word we use in the professional world. It tends to be more of a spiritual or religious word, but I use it at work a lot. Well, let's give each other some grace, and we're going to have bad days, and we're going to be misunderstood, but we need to have those conversations and start with the idea that I probably misunderstood something. I need to give them a chance to explain themselves a little further. So,
thank you,
Thank
Brian.
you.
It has been an absolute privilege to be here with you today in this very impactful 30 minutes. The next 30, we're going to get intentional about reputation in a couple of exercises. So thank you for your advice, and have a safe and fantastic rest of the week.
well, thank you. Thanks for the invite, Kaye, and hopefully of some value. I enjoyed it, and wish you all the best of luck, and be brave, be courageous, and dream big, and I'll look forward to hearing some stories maybe from some of you along the way. So thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you very
you.
Yeah, bye.
All righty. All right. The rest of you, don't hang up yet. we have some more dialogue that we intend to have. But first, in the first few minutes, wow, I got goosebumps. I'm really excited that we were able to spend time with him. What were your first 1 to 2 key takeaways from Brian in his messaging, in his stories? What did you take away about building your reputation at work? And after that, we're going to actually work on our reputations in the last 20 minutes. But while Brian's fresh, either write it in the chat or verbally share, raise your hand. Some of you say you saw accountability, dependability is how he built part of his reputation anyway. The value of being seen as a fixer, as a turnaround, someone that can solve problems. Becky Anderson, I see that you said he had such a strong reputation that was known by others, but he didn't realize it. It kind of goes back to that. Sometimes we're just digging in and working. He's just working hard, and then his reputation, was actually reflected back to him by others. I love that listening first. I love how he said, very thing that I was rewarded for at the beginning of my career, I had to take the edge off as I continued to grow. That's what I was known for, but as I expand my responsibilities, I need to be known for something else.
Yeah, I really like to just do whatever needs to be done. Like, be there for the company, do what needs to be done. And that's how you do get exposure to higher up people on accident, with just working on something that isn't necessarily within your scope, but it needs to get done.
Make the coffee. Oh, I'm going to miss, I won't be able to read all of them. Be reliable, be caring, be humble, open to feedback. I love his message, his advice, just dream big. I mean, he literally thought he was going to work in that first plant for the rest of his life, and no clue where that work would lead him over time.
Yeah, there's a really good book out called From Strength to Strength that maybe is more appropriate for those of us in midlife than younger people, but it talks about how what got you here won't get you there. And there's a lot of psychology behind that sort of transition. So it was really cool to hear him also reference that from his personal life.
Yeah. Well, that evolving, right?
Mhm.
That, and maybe Lala, you could write that in the chat just to capture it for those that wanted to hear
Yes.
it. The light bulb for me was his early career reputation. I didn't know, and it was different than his later year reputation, right? And so he clearly moved from one strength to another set of strengths as he moved throughout his career. Anybody else want to share a takeaway verbally? I like the comment to be who you are, whether at work or home. And he mentioned he saw that, he learned from other leaders that, wow, it's a lot of work to manage one reputation at work and then something different at home. And my gosh, I'm not sure we have the energy to do that. Excellent. Well, I wanted to transition to a couple of activities. So fundamentally, I think when I think about reputation, the most important lever we have to pull is intentionality. And I wasn't going to share any stories when Brian was talking because I wanted to keep the 30 minutes with him about him. But I remember my own first humbling reputation moment. And I was probably 12 to 18 months within Cargill. And much like what Brian shared, I showed up to work and I thought, I'm just going to work, right? Because you work hard and you just work hard and that's your reputation. And I just want to be good at everything. And thought I was doing well. And then I got to my first performance review. And in Cargill, there were a set of leadership attributes that everyone was expected to demonstrate. And one of them was called giving and taking responsibility. And when we got to that one in particular, there was some above average excellence. That one in particular was average. Average. And that one stung. That one, wait, average? No, I'm excellent at that. And that's where I found out that giving and taking responsibility was something that I wanted to be seen as, but wasn't. And that one really stung. And it stung enough that, well, I'm going to get intentional about this. And I'm going to ask for feedback. I'm going to take some actions. And then I'm going to come back to my supervisor in 3 months to say, have you noticed a difference? Am I on a trajectory toward taking and giving more responsibility as I go? So with that story, we're going to take a few moments and we're going to have some reflection time, maybe a minute or two of silence. So just work through it. But Ava, if you want to put up the first prompt, and this is going to be a prompt where we're all going to either reflect on the intentionality we've already taken at this point in our careers and reputation, or maybe it's the first time that you're getting intentional. What are the 1 to 2 elements that are important for you to really manifest or highlight at this point in your career? And as you're thinking about what those elements are, also make sure you think about the why. Not only I want to give and take responsibility at a higher level, and why that's important to you. So Ava in the chat has articulated the question if you'd like to reflect on it in written form. And when you're ready, maybe share your 1 or 2 and why in the chat. And the spirit of developing confidence and courage to speak up. Who would like to share their one or two elements and why verbally. All right, on my screen, I'm showing a May. Is that right? May Peterson?
Yep. Hi, I'm at the Cargill Gainesville facility.
Excellent.
um,
Welcome.
Thank you. For me, it's really important at this stage in my career to be known as a good communicator. It's one of my, I think, strongest strengths. And so it's something I really rely on for all my other goals that I want to continue to develop. As long as I'm known as a good communicator, I know that I can develop in all the other ways that I'm not as confident in. So that's my personal.
That's great. It's almost opening door to even other attributes, is using that communication strength. That's an excellent one to share. Who else would like to share the one they want to focus on and why?
I can share one, Kay. So this is
Sure.
Shandy from Sioux City, Cargill. And the one that came to mind for me was being a servant leader to my peers, because I'm in a role as more of an individual contributor. So I don't have any direct reports, but my role is only going to be beneficial to the team if I can help and support them. So being that servant at kind of that peer level, which can definitely be a little bit challenging with not having that like authority to lead. So challenging myself to focus on that.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love how you framed, I want to be a servant leader, but I don't need to lead a team to do that. I can be a servant, develop servant leadership to those I work with. That's a great example. And I see another hand raised, Ada or Ida?
Aida.
Aida, great,
yeah.
thank you.
Sure. What I like to be known as, it's a person that likes to it's resourceful, and also like the person that educates peers on what's going on in our environment. I know since I've got involved with our ERG programs here in Hoover with Worth, and also with WiM, whatever I hear at these meetings, I pass it along, and I try to educate as much as I can to those who cannot attend these meetings. So that's what I like to be known as.
That's great. I really appreciate the courage to share from those three participants. With so many on the call, I'm not sure I can see everybody's raised hand, but you actually have an opportunity after this next question. So when you think about the one or two elements that you really want to hone at this time in your career, communication, servant leadership, and the why it's important to you. Now, our next question will be, what are the 1 to 2 deliberate actions you're going to take to be seen as that? And so we'll just take a minute. The question Ava will put in the chat again for you to review it. And then in a minute or two, we'll ask others to not only share your attribute and maybe the why, if you're comfortable, but also what you're going to do about it. Oftentimes, saying those intentions out loud gets us over the hump of action. All right, so that's been a a minute or so of quiet reflection time. Who would like to share? I think it also helps the rest of us get more intentional. I know in the first couple of years, if someone would have asked me, how are you going to be intentional about your reputation at work, I would have looked at them with a blank stare and needed some help from others to get me unstuck. So who would like to share their element and their commitment?
Yeah, I guess
I can go. So my element is kind of to be more of a, I guess, give more grace to people. And I think I've always been someone who's hardworking and I get done what needs to be done. But I think people kind of see me as a robot sometimes because it's like I just work hard and I get those tasks done. So what I want to be intentional about is taking time for myself. If I need to go to a doctor's appointment, not trying to do everything I can to do outside of working hours, but take the time. And I think like just talk about personal life and like to be more open and have my personal life and my work life be more fluid with each other. It's kind of where I see it.
Great example. Someone else had jumped in, I think about the same time Ava did.
Okay, I'll just go.
That would be great. Oh, and we get 2 for 1. Welcome.
Thanks. Yeah, so for me, it's more of it alludes back to what he was saying, just getting things done, being valuable, even if it's not. I find that in a lot of instances, people are afraid to step outside their lanes, and it's like, well, it's not my job. And when the job needs to get done, and I've noticed this even within myself, I'm trying really hard to allow people to do their part. And that's like, I'm always just like, get it done, jump in, get it done, and steamroll. And so I try to allow the people who need to do the work. And then if they don't do it, then step in and kind of taking a beat and not just trying to go into problem solving mode and really allow others to do their job. And then at that point, step in and be strategic, and not be quite so reactionary.
That's a great example. And it reminds me of one of those couple actions when I wasn't being seen as responsible as I wanted to be seen at work. One of my actions was, well, I'm going to take responsibility outside of my lane, like nobody else is. So I guess that's one way to grab it and own it and also get the work at hand done. So great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, your commitment to action. Who else would like to go?
I'll go. So I had shared my 2 attributes as being collaborative, and I think to do that, one of the actions to take is just being very conscientious of who the stakeholders are for a specific issue, and then making sure I do a good job communicating with them and like sharing the path forward and getting their buy-in on what I'm going to do.
That's another good one. Thank you, Emily. And Emily, where are you calling from?
I'm also with Cargill, based out of Newark, California, at our salt facility.
Oh, welcome. We have 2 salt facilities on board. Thank you, Emily. Who else would like to share? These examples are super helpful.
I like to go again, if that's okay. So mine is being probably like maybe more mid to later career, and being like, I'm a geologist by profession. I work with engineers at an engineering consulting firm. And in that profession, soft skills aren't really discussed a lot. You don't really learn that training in school. So that was something that I had to learn on the job, and still I'm working on all these years later. And now I'm seeing that a lot of companies are valuing soft skills. It's kind of even surpassing having strong technical skills, because I think they realize if you don't have those soft skills, it can be disruptive to a team. But if you're kind of aware of how your actions are impacting your team members, and I've heard people talk about the value of being a good communicator, a good listener, having grace, all of those things that we're talking about really are into that soft skills, working on your EQ as much as you do on the technical side. So that's what I'm continuing to do, work on my, I want to have a higher EQ. So.
Well, and your commitment to action hopefully is attending more of these sessions. So
yeah, I love these sessions.
Many companies don't have leadership or soft skill programs or content to offer. So WiM, whether it be Colorado or the other states, great avenue to find those if it's not readily available to you. Great. Well, excellent. If we have time for one more before we transition to close, who would like to share what they want to focus on, why, and the commitment to action that they're going to take behind it? Lynn, I see your name on the big screen. Does that mean you would be willing to share? No? For some reason that showed up, so I thought you were raising your hand.
Oh, I already spoke.
Oh, sorry, that was when you went off screen. I'm sorry, when you went off screen, yeah, it then showed your name. Gotcha. Anyone else willing to share? All right. Well, we have had some great examples today. We're on this call and hopefully she's still on, but I want to give Christy Vane a shout out. She is with Cargill and shared this session through her Women in Operations Network. And hence we have a lot of Cargill participants on the call today. So welcome, Christy, and thank you for making this visible within your internal and external network. With today's close, that's going to wrap up building your reputation at work. And I wanted to take a few minutes to highlight our next sessions. If this is the first one that you've been able to join, next month, in the month of April, we are going to focus on setting boundaries. So it'll be around self-advocacy, setting boundaries at work. Exciting topic. And the month after that, we're going to have a session on overcoming major challenges. And that session we will have another guest, this time Julian Chase. He's the head of operations and supply chain for Cargill. Great English accent, super fun, great stories. He's going to come and talk to us about failure. So we hope to see you at one or both of the next two sessions. And until then, go be great, everyone.